This is the Special Needs Lifestyle Show. It's a program talking about mobility and life. It's brought to you by Special Needs Vehicles and Dawn. Now, your hosts, Larry Finman and Vinny Entaglia.
Hello, Tucson and Southern Arizona. Welcome to Special Needs Lifestyles. I'm Larry Finman. Vinny is taking the day off today. He was telling me that he was having technical difficulties with his phone, but he'll be back in the next 2 weeks with 2 shows.
He just wants to watch a football game.
That might be what he could be having his own Super Bowl party. But anyway, our guest today is Darrell Knoch. He's an author of a book called Healthy Self-Image, and that's going to be our basically our show today. He's down here from Scottsdale. In fact, he was at the 2 Bookman stores here earlier today. So it's been a busy Sunday morning and afternoon. Anyway, welcome, Darrell.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here.
No, that's fine. When we heard about you here a few weeks ago, it sounded like a good fit for the types of things that we like to be able to discuss because, Special Needs Lifestyles is, well, our objective is to basically help everybody from basically cradle to grave, so to speak. That maybe the cradle isn't so bad, but sometimes the grave doesn't look so good. But anyway, so tell us a little bit about the book, Darrell, first, and why you decided to write it.
Well, the book, I like to call it a guidebook for prosperity, a guidebook for real happiness. I think a lot of us forget that's what our real goal in life is to be happy and contentment. If we're not contented in life, then life isn't a very fun life. And so a lot of us forget that is what we need to be working towards each day, is to be happy and contented. And so I call the book Mastering a Healthy Self-Image, the guidebook to real happiness and enormous success. And, I had an unfortunate situation early on in life, and we'll talk about that, but I didn't have a good, healthy self-image. And so I went about a process of how to raise my self-esteem, my self-confidence, my ability to know that prosperity was for me also. And so as I retired 3 years ago, I decided I needed to teach the world that story of how I took my life from growing up in the ghetto of Chicago to how to be prosperous in life and how to be really, truly happy.
Oh, no, that's very interesting. Because, getting out of the ghetto for anybody, for that matter, is not an easy process. It tends to trap people, actually, a lot of people.
Well,
if they survive the shootings, or at least these days, maybe it wasn't quite as rough back then.
It was pretty rough. Growing up in the ghetto of Chicago, mm-hmm. I literally lived in the projects, certainly, so to speak, we think of life has gotten a little bit worse, but, when, prosperity has really come a long ways, mm-hmm. there certainly is still a lot of people that don't have prosperity today, but there was actually even a bigger percentage that didn't have prosperity 57 years ago. And so the ghetto of Chicago was a pretty rough area, and no offense to any other race in the world. We're all just human beings.
Sure.
But I was one of the few Caucasians living in that set of projects.
Okay.
So it was not fun for me to be a Caucasian in an area that...
Well, you would have been a minority.
I absolutely was.
Very much a minority, yeah. So the reverse minority. Anyway, okay, so tell us a little bit more about yourself. What did you do before you wrote the book?
Well, I've been in business pretty much all of my life. I've been a businessman for 35 years. I've had the good fortune of starting several companies. I've actually taken 5 companies that I started from scratch, and I grew them to multi-million-dollar-a-year companies and that were national and international companies. I literally took one company to 30 countries around the world. The last company that I just sold 3 years ago, we were grossing $500 million a year. And that is, and I really feel the need to point out, that came from a little kid growing up in the ghetto of Chicago to being able to learn, teach myself how to change my outlook of life and grow companies to that size.
Well, in that business that you had, is that what brought you to Scottsdale, where you live now, or did you decide to retire in Scottsdale?
Literally 3.5 years ago, actually about 4.5 years ago, I had an unfortunate situation that 4 very close people to me passed away, one right after another. Like 6 months apart, 4 people passed away. And it just shocked me. And I'd worked all my life to make all this money, and I've lost it a few times, by the way, also. You know, any entrepreneur that starts from nothing, you find that most of us have gone bankrupt more than one time. And
so, yes.
So I'd been through all of that, and then I'd come back and lost it and come back and lost it and come back again. And so I was so busy searching that money continually, and then I lost those people in my life, and I said, you got to change your outlook. And
Okay.
I went into my partner and I said, I want out. I said, I'm going to sell you my half of the company for half of what it's worth, but I want you to buy me out right now. And I had lived in Phoenix a number of years ago.
Okay.
And I knew I needed.
Do we want to mention how many numbers of years ago? Or maybe not.
It was 1975.
Things have changed a little bit since then.
They have changed a lot.
Okay.
So I had lived there in 1975. I knew there was lots of sunshine, and with those 4 people passing away, I really needed to see some sunshine. I needed a pick me up in my spirit, so to speak. And
so all of these businesses were, for the most part, done out of the Chicago area? Or?
No, actually, the first company I started was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Okay.
The second company I started was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You
just move around a little bit.
Well, I happened to sell the first company to a company in Chattanooga, Tennessee,
okay.
And then I stayed on with them for about a year, and then after about a year, my older brother wanted me to help him start a company, and I told him, I said, he was living in Michigan at the time, and I said, I'll help you start this company, but I will not come back to Michigan. Mm-hmm. If you want to have me, you've got to move your company to Tennessee.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota, so I know what northern Michigan, northern Minnesota, Chicago. Those are all horribly, horribly cold climates.
Oh, the winter times are brutal for me.
Oh, they are. You know, I can still remember the 60 below with the chill factor, and Tucson is a much, much better place.
Well, I have to admit,
Phoenix for me is a little hot. Tucson for me is much, much better.
Well, I've wondered about that. I've never spent a lot of time in Tucson. I've been through here many, many times, but I've never spent any length of time here. And the last 2 years, I have found myself wanting to get out of Phoenix in the summertime.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's, always a little bit cooler. Well, let's see. We're probably coming up on a good time to take a break. Give us a call at 790-2040, or if you're out of the area, 520-790-2040. And we'll also get into the book a little bit more after the break with my guest, Darrell Knoch, and we'll be back after these messages.
That's live and local, only on AM 1030, KVOI, The Voice. Call in now, 790-2040. That's 790-2040.
Hello, Tucson and Southern Arizona. You're back live with Special Needs Lifestyles right here on KVOI, AM 1030, The Voice. Give us a call at 790-2040. My guest is Darrell Knoch, who is the author of Mastering a Healthy Self-Image, the guidebook to real happiness and enormous success. Welcome back,
Thank
Darrell.
you.
We got a little bit of a background on you and a little bit about the reason about why you wanted to write the book. Let's get into the book.
Okay.
What are you basically trying to describe to everybody here?
Well,
and the process of it.
and
also, where
yes.
can they find your book?
Well,
before we forget.
That is a good question also.
All right.
Some of the Bookman's stores here in town have it also, but Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, TrueWealthUniversity.com. That is my website.
Okay.
Earlier on in life, I put together True Wealth University because I felt like there's more to life than just money. Okay. So you have to have balance in life. So that's why TrueWealthUniversity.com was my choice.
Okay.
But I grew up with a very poor self-esteem. Growing.
And I guess why was that?
Well, there was two reasons, or two major reasons, let me say. That when I was about a year old, I was starting to run out towards the road. And my older sister, I'm the youngest of 7. My older sister was 11 at the time. She came running after me, and she literally tripped on the sidewalk, and she landed square on the back of my head and literally crushed my face into the cement.
Wow.
So, being on welfare and the youngest of 7, my dad was not living at home with us. He had left, and so we were on welfare. My mother had 7 children she had to take care of, and back in the 1950s, she had a 9th grade education, and so that wasn't an easy task for her to have 7 children and still feed them.
Sure.
So,
let alone take care of the medical expenses.
My mother had no choice but to wipe my face clean, and I grew up with a crushed face and a crushed nose. Mm. Now, we've all heard lots here lately about the bullying aspect of some of the children all over the United States. And, I'm just here to say that it was alive and well 57 years ago as I started growing up. Mm-hmm. And so having a crushed face and a crushed nose, I had a lot of kids that would joke with me, through school, a long time of school, I was known as the nose because it was flat and wide, and my face was crushed in a little bit, and so my dad came back home, kind of about every 2 or 3 years he'd come back home just long enough to get my mother pregnant and take off again. And so during the time that he was there, he always told me and my older brothers and sisters that we were all no good, that we were never going to amount to anything. In fact, my dad told me that I had one of the biggest mouths he'd ever seen, and that my mouth was for sure going to get me into trouble as I grew up, and he anticipated I'd be in prison most of my life.
That's strange for a parent, I guess, to do that. You hear stories of that because, usually it's the parent that's always trying to encourage the child, if anything.
Well, that certainly should be the way you would hope it would be, but unfortunately, based on my growing up years, and I have certainly seen, a lot of people say things to their children that they really don't mean. They don't mean it to stick the way that it actually does. Even when you let's say that you say to your kid, you're a bad boy. Mm-hmm. We all have said that to children at one point or a time, but in my opinion, that's not the kind of self-talk that we want to be having.
Sure.
You're not a bad boy. You just did something that wasn't the way you should have.
It's the actions
right.
rather than the individual, sure.
And so I just always felt that, I needed to change the way that I perceived myself. I had the first surgery, and it's a little bit of a joke, so hopefully you'll be okay with this joke. But I say it took 15 hours of surgery in order to get me to look this pretty.
Okay. All right.
But I literally have had 3 different surgeries on my face and my nose now. I had my very first surgery at age 17, and then 2 other surgeries at 40 and 40.